Evicting a tenant can seem like a complicated process, but in this video, we'll quickly explain the eviction laws in Michigan and outline some simple steps that landlords can take to initiate an eviction. In this video, we'll talk about what the eviction process looks like, Michigan laws that determine how evictions are handled, and how to legally remove a non-compliant tenant from a property. Be sure to watch to the end of this video to find a link to a fillable eviction notice. First, what is an eviction? Eviction is the legal process needed to remove a tenant. Landlords cannot change locks on a property or physically remove a tenant from that property if they believe the tenant has violated the terms of a lease agreement. If a tenant refuses to leave, the landlord must seek an eviction from the court. One thing to keep in mind is that eviction is different from the simple termination of a lease. A landlord can opt not to renew a lease after the specified term has ended. There is no need to involve a court in this process. In Michigan, if a tenant fails to pay rent or breaches the terms of a lease in some other way, the landlord can issue what's known as a notice to quit. There are several versions of this form and each applies to a specific situation. One option is the 24-hour notice to quit. Michigan state law says that if a tenant is found to be manufacturing, distributing, possessing with intent to distribute, or possessing an illegal drug on the premises, the landlord can terminate the tenancy by giving the tenant a written 24-hour notice to quit. This can be done only after a formal police report has been filed. It's also important to note that the lease must allow for this manner of termination in order to use this option. The second version of this form is used when the tenant fails to pay rent on time. If this occurs, the landlord must issue a 7-day notice to quit. This form orders the tenant to either pay rent within 7 days or face eviction. In Michigan, there is no grace period following a missed rent payment, so late fees may begin accumulating as soon as the lease allows. There's also a notice to quit for non-compliance. There are two versions of this form. Each one is designed for a different lease violation. The first, the 7-day notice to quit, can be used if extensive damage has been done to the property, if a tenant has posed a serious and continuing health hazard, or if a serious assault has occurred on the premises. This form tells tenants they have 7 days before the landlord commences a lawsuit. The 30-day notice to quit, on the other hand, can be used for other, less serious violations. An example is housing an unauthorized pet. This form tells the tenants to fix the problem within 30 days or face eviction. Finally, a 30-day notice to quit can be used to terminate a month-to-month tenancy. A notice to quit must be delivered in person or via first-class mail. The form can be delivered electronically, but only if the tenant has consented to this in writing. If the notice is delivered in person, the time of the notice begins running the next day. If the notice is mailed, the time begins the next mail delivery day. This means Sundays and holidays do not count. Upon receiving a notice to quit, the tenant has an opportunity to respond by paying rent or rectifying the problem, unless the problem is drug-related. If the tenant does not respond within the allotted time frame, the landlord may commence a lawsuit. In Michigan, this is known as a summary proceedings action. This begins when the landlord files two forms known as a summons and a complaint in the district court where the property is located. The complaint tells the court why the landlord is seeking to evict the tenant. A copy of the notice to quit on the tenant and a copy of the lease agreement must be attached to the complaint. The summons sets a hearing date, which is generally within 3 to 10 days of the date that the summons was issued. This form also advises the tenant of their right to arrange an attorney. After this paperwork is filed with the district court, copies of the complaint and summons must be delivered to the tenant either personally or by first-class mail. If diligent attempts to serve the documents are unsuccessful, then the documents may be securely attached to the main entrance of the rental property unit. Proof of how and when these documents were delivered to the tenant must be filed with the court. Both the landlord and the tenant must appear before the court on the date specified in the summons. At the hearing, the tenant can object to the eviction and request a jury trial. If the tenant pays all overdue rent and fees during the process, the tenant may be allowed to stay. If, however, the tenant fails to appear in court, the court will return possession of the property to the landlord. 10 days later, at the landlord's request, the court will issue an order of eviction, and the court officer will physically remove the tenant and the tenant's possessions from the property. We've got everything you need to get eviction proceedings going in Michigan. From eviction notices to court documents, you can access all of them at the link below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos about relevant legal issues.